The howling wind sliced through Lillian Vaughn's thin dress like razors, her body shivering violently as her stepfather's final words echoed in her ears, more frigid than the blizzard engulfing Rico, Colorado on that merciless winter night of 1878. "You're nothing but a burden, a mouth to feed with no use to this family," Jeremiah had bellowed, his breath reeking of whiskey as he dragged her toward the door. "Your mother's been dead 6 months and her charity died with her." Lillian had pleaded, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fully fall. At 20 years old, she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to in this mining town where winter showed no mercy to the unprepared. But Jeremiah had made his decision, fueled by liquor and the encouragement of his new lady friend who wanted Lillian gone. With one final shove, he had thrust her into the blinding white storm, tossing her small satchel of belongings after her. The door slammed with finality, the lock turning with a click that sealed her fate. Now she stumbled blindly through knee-deep snow, the mountain winds pushing against her as if testing her resolve to live. Her fingers had long since lost feeling, and her lips had turned a dangerous shade of blue. Each step became more difficult than the last as the snow swallowed her feet and ankles. "Help," she called, though her voice was swept away, a whisper against nature's roar. "Please, someone." The town was half a mile behind her, but in this whiteout it might as well have been 100. She'd been walking, or trying to, for what felt like hours, though the pocket watch tucked securely in her satchel would have told her it had been less than 30 minutes. Lillian didn't see the drop-off until it was too late. One moment she was fighting against the wind, the next, the ground disappeared beneath her. She tumbled down an embankment, the world a dizzying blur of white, her body colliding with hardness beneath the snow rocks, roots, the unforgiving earth. When she finally came to rest, the pain was immediate and overwhelming, but the cold was worse. It seeped into her bones, promising a peaceful sleep from which she would never wake. Her consciousness began to fade when she thought she heard hoofbeats cutting through the howl of the wind. Probably just her mind playing tricks, offering comfort in her final moments. Then a shadow loomed above her and strong arms lifted her frozen form. "Hold on, miss," a deep voice commanded. "I've got you now." Through half-lidded eyes, Lillian caught glimpses of a man's face, stern yet concerned, framed by a wool scarf and wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow. He hoisted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness for hands so rough and calloused. My things," she managed to whisper, pointing weakly toward her satchel half buried in snow. The man retrieved it without comment, securing it to his saddle before mounting behind her. One strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest as he turned the horse and urged it forward. "My cabin's not far," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Just stay awake if you can." Lillian tried to nod, but her body no longer seemed to be taking orders from her mind. Instead, she slumped against him, surrendering to the strange comfort of this stranger's embrace as the blizzard raged on. She drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the steady rocking motion of the horse beneath them, the firm pressure of the man's arm around her, and the occasional soft encouragement he would murmur when she stirred. "Nearly there," he would say, or "just a bit longer now." When they finally arrived at the cabin, Lillian was barely aware of being carried inside. The sudden absence of wind was disorienting, as was the blast of heat that greeted her frozen skin. She was dimly cognizant of being placed on something soft, of blankets being piled atop her, of her sodden shoes and stockings being removed. "Miss, can you hear me?" The voice seemed to come from very far away. "I need to get these wet clothes off you before you freeze to death." She must have made some sound of assent, because gentle hands began to work at the buttons of her dress, removing the ice-stiffened fabric with as much propriety as the dire situation allowed. Layer by layer, the cold garments were replaced by dry blankets, until she was cocooned in warmth. "Drink this," the voice instructed, and a cup was pressed to her lips. Something warm and sweet slid down her throat, spreading heat from within. Only then did Lillian finally surrender completely to the darkness. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through a small window, casting golden rectangles on a rough-hewn wooden floor. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then it all came flooding back: Jeremiah's rage, the blizzard falling, and then the stranger. She attempted to sit up, wincing at the soreness that permeated her entire body. "Easy there," came that same deep voice from the night before. "You took quite a tumble." Lillian turned toward the sound and saw him for the first time in proper light. He stood by a wood stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled heavenly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that spoke of days spent beneath the open sky, tanned and weathered despite the winter season. His hair was the color of wheat, cropped short beneath a hat he'd removed upon entering the cabin. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, most clear blue, like a summer sky, so at odds with the harshness of his surroundings. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat before trying again. "Who are you?" "Flint Emerson," he replied, ladling whatever he was cooking into a bowl. "Most folks just call me Emerson." He approached and handed her the bowl, which contained a simple but fragrant stew. Only then did Lillian realize how ravenous she was. "Thank you, Mr. Emerson," she said, accepting the food with still trembling hands. "I'm Lillian Vaughn. Just Emerson is fine." He pulled a chair over and sat a respectful distance from the bed where she lay. "Want to tell me what you were doing out in that blizzard, Miss Vaughn? Not exactly the kind of night for a stroll." Lillian stared down at the stew, embarrassment and anger warring within her. The kindness of this stranger made her own situation seem all the more pathetic. "My stepfather threw me out," she said finally, the words bitter on her tongue. "My mother died this past summer. Consumption. He tolerated me these past months, but last night, well." She trailed off, taking a spoonful of stew to avoid saying more. Emerson's expression hardened, but he said nothing for a long moment. "You have any other family? Anyone who might take you in?" She shook her head. "No one. My father died in the war when I was a child. Mother remarried when I was 12. We moved west for Jeremiah's mining prospects." Another spoonful of stew. "There's no one." Emerson stood suddenly, moving to the window to look out at the snow-covered landscape. The blizzard had passed, leaving a crystalline white world in its wake. "Well, you can't travel anywhere today," he said matter-of-factly. "Roads will be impassable for at least a day or two. You're welcome to stay here until then." Relief washed over Lillian, followed quickly by wariness. She knew nothing of this man beyond his name and that he had saved her life. "I don't wish to impose," she began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "It's not an imposition. It would be poor Christian charity to send you back out there, especially with nowhere to go." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Besides, I could use the company." "Gets quiet out here." For the first time, Lillian took proper stock of her surroundings. The cabin was small but surprisingly neat, with a main room containing the bed she occupied, a table with 2 chairs, the wood stove, and various hooks and shelves holding tools and supplies. A door in one wall presumably led to another room. Everything spoke of utility rather than comfort, yet there was a certain coziness to the space. "Are you a miner?" she asked, noticing calluses on his hands that suggested hard physical labor. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, madam, I ranch." Got a small spread just down the valley. Cattle mostly, though they're all huddled in the barn during this weather. You were out in the blizzard tending to them, she realized aloud. He nodded. Was heading back when I spotted you. Lucky thing, too. Lucky indeed. Had he been a few minutes later, or had he taken a different route home? Lillian didn't want to contemplate the alternative. I'm in your debt, Mr. Emerson, she caught herself. Emerson. No debt, he said firmly. Anyone would have done the same, but Lillian knew better. In her experience, kindness without expectation was rare enough to be remarkable. Rest now, Emerson instructed, taking the empty bowl from her hands. Your clothes are drying by the stove. I found a shirt of mine for you to wear in the meantime. It's not exactly proper, but it's clean and warm. Only then did Lillian realize she was wearing an oversized man's shirt beneath the blankets. Heat rushed to her face at the thought of him undressing her, though she knew it had been necessary. Thank you, she managed to say, despite her embarrassment. Emerson seemed to read her thoughts. I kept my eyes closed as much as possible, he said, the faintest hint of color rising to his own cheeks. And I kept you covered. I promise you, your virtue remains intact. The straightforward way he addressed the matter somehow made it less awkward. Lillian nodded her acceptance of his words. Get some more sleep if you can, he continued. I need to check on the livestock again, but I won't be gone long. Cabin's secure, and there's water in that pitcher if you get thirsty. After he left, Lillian sank back against the pillow, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been in her own bed in her stepfather's house, uncertain of her future, but at least secure in having a roof over her head. Now, she was dependent on the goodwill of a stranger, a handsome one at that, though she pushed that observation firmly aside. She must have dozed off, because when she next opened her eyes, Emerson was back, stoking the fire in the stove. The quality of light had changed. It was late afternoon now. Feel any better? He asked when he noticed she was awake. Lillian took stock of her body. She was sore all over, and she could feel bruises forming from her fall, but the deadly chill was gone, replaced by a comfortable warmth. Much thank you, she replied, sitting up cautiously. I think I'd like to get up for a bit, if that's all right. Emerson nodded. Your dress is dry, though it tore some when you fell. I left it folded on that chair there. I'll step out while you change. True to his word, he exited through the door she had noticed earlier, leaving her alone. Lillian moved slowly, every muscle protesting as she rose from the bed. Her dress was indeed torn at the hem and along one sleeve, but it was wearable. She changed quickly, grateful for the return to proper attire despite the comfort of Emerson's shirt. When he returned, she was seated at the table, combing through her tangled hair with her fingers, wishing for a proper brush. I've got a comb, he offered, noticing her struggle. He retrieved it from a shelf and handed it to her, careful not to let their fingers touch. Thank you, she said, accepting it gratefully. For everything. As she worked the comb through her long brown hair, she couldn't help but notice him watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. How long have you lived out here? She asked, partly to break the silence and partly out of genuine curiosity about this man who had saved her life. 5 years now, he replied, busying himself with preparations for their evening meal. Came west after the war, worked as a hired hand on various ranches until I saved enough to buy my own place. You fought in the war, a shadow crossed his face. Union cavalry, joined up in '63 when I was 18, saw more than I care to remember. Lillian nodded, understanding his reticence. Many men who had survived the conflict preferred not to speak of it. And you've been alone all this time, she ventured. His hands stilled for a moment before resuming their work. Yes. Something in his tone discouraged further questions on that subject, so she changed tack. What will happen when the road's clear? To Rico, I mean. Life will go on, he said simply. Town's seen worse blizzards. Miners will dig out the mine entrances, stores will reopen, the saloon probably never closed. He paused. What about you? What will you do? The question hung heavy in the air. Lillian had been avoiding thinking about it, but now it loomed large and inescapable. I don't know, she admitted. I have a little money saved, not much. Perhaps enough for a stagecoach ticket somewhere. But where to go? She trailed off, the enormity of her situation suddenly overwhelming. Emerson was quiet for a long moment. There's a widow in town, Martha Hollister. She sometimes takes in boarders. Might be she'd let you stay in exchange for help around the house until you get on your feet. Hope fluttered in Lillian's chest. You think she would? Worth asking, he said with a slight shrug. She's a good woman. Fair. They ate dinner together that evening, a simple fare of beans, salt pork, and biscuits that Emerson prepared with practiced efficiency. Lillian insisted on helping with the washing up afterward, despite his protests that she should rest. I'm not an invalid, she told him firmly, and I won't be a burden. Something flickered in his eyes at that. You're not a burden, Miss Vaughn. Lillian, please, she said. If I'm to call you Emerson, you should call me Lillian. A small smile touched his lips. Lillian, then. That night, Emerson insisted she take the bed again while he made a pallet for himself by the stove. Lillian protested, but he would not be swayed. I've slept in worse conditions, he assured her. Much worse. This is luxury compared to some places I bedded down during the war. So Lillian accepted his generosity once more, though it troubled her to displace him in his own home. As she lay in the darkness listening to his steady breathing, she wondered at the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Had her stepfather not cast her out, had the blizzard not come when it did, had Emerson not happened along at exactly the right moment? She shivered, not from cold but from the realization of how close she had come to death. Yet here she was, warm and safe because of the kindness of a man she hadn't known existed a day ago. With that thought, she finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emerson was already up and about when Lillian awoke, having tended to his animals and brought in more firewood. Roads should be clear enough by tomorrow, he told her over a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. I can take you into town then, speak to Mrs. Hollister on your behalf. Lillian nodded, trying to mask the sudden anxiety she felt at the prospect. In just one day, this cabin had become a haven, and the thought of leaving him was unexpectedly distressing. I appreciate that, she said, keeping her voice steady. They spent the day in quiet companionship, with Emerson showing her around his small ranch once the sun had risen high enough to warm the air slightly. The main house, the cabin where they had stayed, was modest, but well built. A short distance away stood a barn where he kept his horses and several milk cows, currently huddled together for warmth. A chicken coop adjoined the barn, and beyond that stretched fenced pastures now covered in a blanket of pristine snow. It's not much, Emerson said as they stood looking out over his property, but it's mine, paid for free and clear last year. It's wonderful, Lillian said sincerely. After living in mining camps and cramped town houses, the open space and quiet beauty of the ranch was breathtaking. You've built something real here. He glanced at her, seeming surprised by her assessment. It's a work in progress. Isn't everything? She replied with a small smile. As they walked back to the cabin, Emerson asked about her life before Rico. Lillian told him about her childhood in Ohio, her father's death at Gettysburg, the difficult years that followed, and her mother's remarriage to Jeremiah, a man who had seemed kind at first but revealed a different nature after the wedding. When Mother fell ill, I cared for her, Lillian said, her voice growing soft with the painful memory. Jeremiah was always at the mines or the saloon. He barely visited her sick after she died. She sighed. He made it clear I was tolerated, not wanted. I tried to earn my keep cooking, cleaning, mending his clothes. But it was never enough. And when he started courting Willa Harper from the boarding house, well, she made it clear there wasn't room for me. He had no right, Emerson said, his voice tight with anger. To cast you out like that in weather like this, it's unforgivable. The vehemence in his tone surprised her. You don't know him, she said, though there was no defense in her words. I know enough, Emerson replied. A man who would do that to his stepdaughter doesn't deserve the title of father, step or otherwise. They had reached the cabin, and he held the door open for her to enter. As she passed him, Lillian was acutely aware of his proximity, of the clean, masculine scent of him, of the way his presence seemed to fill the small space. They prepared dinner together that evening, moving around the confined kitchen area with surprising ease, as if they had done so for years rather than just a day. Lillian found herself laughing at Emerson's dry observations about some of Rico's more colorful residents, and he in turn seemed to enjoy her stories of life in the East before the war. It wasn't until they were washing the dishes that their hands accidentally touched, and both froze at the contact. Lillian's heart began to race as Emerson's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. He cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. I should bring in more wood for the night, he said, his voice slightly rough. Lillian nodded, unable to trust her own voice. What was happening to her? This man was a stranger still, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. That night, as they prepared for sleep with the now familiar routine of her taking the bed and him making his pallet by the stove, Lillian found herself reluctant to end the day. Emerson, she said as he was about to extinguish the lamp. What if Mrs. Hollister has no room for me? He paused, his hand hovering over the lamp. Then we'll find another solution. I won't leave you without a safe place, Lillian. I promise you that. The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? Emerson seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Why wouldn't I be? Because you don't know me. Because you owe me nothing. Because most people in this world look after themselves first and foremost. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe I know what it's like to be alone in the world, he said finally, to have nowhere to turn. Before she could respond, he turned down the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the orange glow from the stove. Good night, Lillian, he said softly. Good night, Emerson, she whispered back, wondering about the pain she had glimpsed in his eyes just before the light went out. Morning came with a knock at the door, startling both of them awake. Emerson was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle that hung on pegs above the door. Who's there? He called, his voice hard. It's Wade, Emerson, came the response. Got your mail from town. Figured I'd drop it by since I was checking my trap lines up this way. Emerson relaxed visibly, setting the rifle aside and opening the door. A short, wiry man with a graying beard stood there, his eyes widening comically when he spotted Lillian sitting up in bed. Well now, he said, a slow grin spreading across his weathered face. Don't believe I've had the pleasure, madam. Wade, Emerson said warningly. Miss Vaughn was caught in the blizzard, he explained, stepping aside to let the man enter. I found her half frozen and brought her here to recover. Miss Vaughn, this is Wade Tucker. He runs the general store in Rico. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Tucker, Lillian said, acutely aware of how the situation must appear to an outsider. Tucker nodded politely to her before turning back to Emerson with raised eyebrows. Found her in the blizzard, eh? Mighty fortunate for the lady." "Indeed it was," Lillian interjected before Emerson could respond. "Mr. Emerson saved my life. I would have frozen to death had he not come along when he did." Tucker seemed to accept this, though his eyes still twinkled with barely suppressed amusement. "Well, roads are mostly clear now. Stage should be running again by afternoon. I'd offer you a ride to town, madam, but my sled won't fit 3, and I've got my traps to check." "I'll be taking Miss Vaughn to town myself later today," Emerson said firmly. "Mighty fine of you," Tucker replied, his grin widening. He handed Emerson a small bundle of envelopes. "Your mail, as promised. Mostly catalogs, looks like, and a letter from that cattle broker in Denver." After Tucker left, Lillian could feel the change in the atmosphere. Their secluded interlude had been broken by the intrusion of the outside world, and with it came a reminder of the precariousness of her situation. "He'll talk," she said quietly. "In town, I mean, about finding me here." Emerson sighed. "Likely so. Wade's a good man, but he does enjoy a bit of gossip." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I didn't think about how this might affect your reputation." "My reputation?" Lillian almost laughed at the irony. "I doubt there's much left to protect." A young woman thrown out by her stepfather, spending nights alone with a bachelor. She shook her head. "Besides, my only concern is how it might reflect on you." Emerson looked at her strangely. "On me?" "Yes, people might think, they might assume." She felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Let them think what they will," he said dismissively. "I know the truth, and so do you." They ate a quick breakfast and prepared to leave for town. Lillian gathered her few possessions into her satchel, smoothed her torn dress as best she could, and attempted to make herself presentable. Emerson hitched his horse to a small sleigh and helped her climb aboard, wrapping a thick buffalo robe around her for the journey. The ride to Rico was largely silent, both lost in their own thoughts. Lillian couldn't help but wonder what awaited her in town. Would Mrs. Hollister take her in? Would she find work? And what of Jeremiah? Would she encounter him on the streets? And how would he react to seeing her alive and well? Most troubling of all was the thought of saying goodbye to Emerson. In just 2 days, he had become important to her in a way she couldn't fully articulate, even to herself. Rico appeared on the horizon, smoke rising from chimneys against the clear blue sky. The town was small but busy, with miners, ranchers, and townspeople alike digging out from the recent blizzard. As Emerson guided the sleigh down the main street, Lillian was aware of curious glances directed their way. They stopped first at the Mercantile, where Emerson purchased a few supplies and inquired after Mrs. Hollister. "She's home, far as I know," Tucker told them, his eyes still dancing with unspoken amusement. "Mention my name when you call on her. We go back a ways." Mrs. Hollister's house was at the edge of town, a neat 2-story structure with lace curtains in the windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Emerson helped Lillian down from the sleigh and escorted her to the front door, his hand a steady presence at her elbow. The woman who answered their knock was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and kind eyes that missed nothing. She took in Lillian's torn dress and Emerson's protective stance with a raised eyebrow. "Mrs. Hollister, my name is Flint Emerson," he began. "Wade Tucker suggested we call on you. Did he now?" Mrs. Hollister's gaze shifted to Lillian. "And who might you be, young lady?" "Lillian Vaughn, madam," she replied, summoning her courage. "I find myself in need of lodging and was told you sometimes take in boarders." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened slightly. "Come in, both of you. It's too cold for doorstep conversations." Inside, Mrs. Hollister led them to a parlor furnished with well-worn but immaculately kept furniture. After they were seated, Emerson explained the circumstances of their meeting, carefully omitting the details of Lillian's undressing and their sleeping arrangements. "So you see, madam," he concluded, "Miss Vaughn is in need of a safe place to stay and perhaps employment." "I thought of you immediately." Mrs. Hollister studied Lillian thoughtfully. "You're Jeremiah Vaughn's stepdaughter, aren't you? I recall seeing you at church with your mother before her passing." "Yes, madam," Lillian confirmed. "And he cast you out, in that blizzard." The older woman's voice hardened. "Despicable." "I don't wish to speak ill of him," Lillian began, but Mrs. Hollister waved her words away. "No need. The man's reputation speaks for itself," she sighed. "As it happens, I could use some help around the house. My arthritis isn't what it used to be, and these stairs get harder every year. I have a small room upstairs that's yours if you want it, in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping with my sewing work. I take in mending for extra income." Relief washed over Lillian. "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister. I accept gratefully." "Good, that's settled then." The older woman rose. "I'll show you to your room, and then perhaps Mr. Emerson would be kind enough to fetch your things from your stepfather's house." Lillian tensed. "I don't think that would be wise." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister said firmly. "You're entitled to your belongings, girl, and if Jeremiah gives any trouble—" She glanced at Emerson. "Well, I suspect Mr. Emerson here can handle himself. The room Mrs. Hollister showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the backyard. It was more than Lillian had dared hope for. "Thank you," she said again as they descended the stairs to where Emerson waited. "I'll work hard, I promise." "I'm sure you will," Mrs. Hollister replied. "Now, about those belongings." Emerson agreed to accompany Lillian to her stepfather's house, though she could tell he was uneasy about the prospect. They rode in his sleigh to the other side of town, where Jeremiah's small frame house stood among similar dwellings occupied by miners and their families. "You don't have to come in," Lillian told him as they approached. "I can manage." "I'm coming," Emerson said in a tone that brooked no argument. To Lillian's relief, the house appeared empty when they arrived. Using the key she still had in her satchel, she let them in and quickly gathered her few possessions: some clothes, a hair brush, a small framed photograph of her mother, and a few books. It took less than 10 minutes to pack everything into a carpet bag Emerson had purchased at the mercantile. They were about to leave when the front door burst open, and Jeremiah stood there, his face flushed with anger or drink or both. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, glaring at Lillian. Then his gaze shifted to Emerson. "And who the devil are you?" "We're just collecting Lillian's things," Emerson said calmly. "Then we'll be on our way." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "So you survived the storm, did you?" He spat to one side. "Should have known you'd be too stubborn to die, and you've already found yourself a protector, I see." The implication in his words made Lillian flush with anger and shame. "Mr. Emerson saved my life after you tried to end it," she said, her voice shaking. "We're leaving now, and I won't trouble you again." She made to step past him, but Jeremiah grabbed her arm roughly. "Not so fast. Those are my wife's things you're taking." "They're mine," Lillian insisted, trying to pull free. "Mother left them to me." "Let her go," Emerson said quietly, but there was steel beneath the words. Jeremiah sneered at him. "Or what, cowboy? This is between me and my stepdaughter." What happened next was so swift Lillian barely had time to register it. Emerson moved forward, breaking Jeremiah's grip on her arm with one hand while the other came up to grasp her stepfather by the shirt collar. "She's not your stepdaughter anymore," Emerson said, his voice deadly calm. "You gave up that right when you threw her out to die. Now we're taking her things and leaving. If you try to stop us, you'll regret it." The two men stared at each other for a long, tense moment. Then, surprisingly, Jeremiah laughed. "Take her," he said, his eyes full of malice. "You'll soon find she's more trouble than she's worth." Emerson released him and turned to Lillian. "Let's go." Outside, Lillian took a deep breath of the cold, clean air, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She would never have to enter that house again, never have to endure Jeremiah's cruelty or indifference. "Are you all right?" Emerson asked as he helped her into the sleigh. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. They returned to Mrs. Hollister's in silence, Emerson carrying Lillian's carpetbag to the door. "I should be going," he said once they reached the porch. "I've got chores waiting back at the ranch." "Of course," Lillian said, suddenly aware that this was goodbye. "Emerson, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done." He shifted uncomfortably, his hat in his hands. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad you're safe." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. "Will you?" Lillian began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "I come to town every week or so for supplies," Emerson said, seemingly understanding her unasked question. "Perhaps I could call on you if that would be acceptable." Her heart lifted at his words. "I would like that very much." He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Then I'll see you soon, Lillian Vaughn." As she watched him drive away, Lillian felt a curious mixture of sadness and hope. She had lost her home and been rejected by the only family she had left, but she had gained something too, a fresh start, and perhaps the beginning of something new with the man who had saved her life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Lillian settled into life at Mrs. Hollister's. The older woman proved to be a fair but exacting mistress, with high standards for housekeeping and cooking. But she was also kind, teaching Lillian her techniques for fine needlework and sharing stories of her own life, including her late husband who had died in a mining accident 15 years earlier. "Never remarried," Mrs. Hollister told her one evening as they sat by the fire, hands busy with mending. "Never felt the need. Jacob was the love of my life, and once was enough." Lillian nodded, her thoughts drifting to Emerson as they often did these days. "Although," Mrs. Hollister continued with a sly glance, "I'm not against the idea of marriage for others, particularly young people with their whole lives ahead of them." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Hollister, Martha, please. And don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. That rancher of yours has been calling here regularly for 3 weeks now." It was true. Emerson had been true to his word, visiting Lillian whenever he came to town. Their conversations were sometimes halting, sometimes flowing easily, but always there was that undercurrent of awareness between them, a spark that neither acknowledged openly but both felt. "He's not my rancher," Lillian protested, though the words lacked conviction. "Not yet, perhaps," Martha said with a knowing smile, "but I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, and the way you look at him, for that matter." Before Lillian could formulate a response, there was a knock at the door. Martha rose to answer it, returning moments later with none other than Emerson himself. "Look who's come calling," she announced, her eyes twinkling. "I'll just go put on some coffee." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Lillian and Emerson alone in the parlor. He looked different today, Lillian realized. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a clean shirt and vest, and his hair was neatly combed. "You look nice," she blurted out, then immediately wished she could take back the forward comment. But Emerson smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Thank you, so do you." Lillian glanced down at her simple dress, one of several Martha had helped her alter from older garments. "Thank you." He cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might like to attend the social at the church on Saturday. With me." Her heart gave a little leap. Like an outing together, like a proper courtship, he said, meeting her eyes directly now. If you're amenable. Amenable. Such a formal word for the riot of emotions currently coursing through her. Yes, she said simply. I would like that very much. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Good, that's good. From the kitchen doorway, Martha cleared her throat. Coffee's ready, she announced, though the knowing look in her eyes suggested she'd heard every word. The church social was a lively affair, with nearly everyone in Rico in attendance. There was food, music provided by local fiddle players, and dancing in the cleared space of the church hall. Lillian was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed her and Emerson as they entered together, but his steady presence beside her gave her courage. Wade Tucker was one of the first to approach them, his face split by that same knowing grin. Emerson, Miss Vaughn, good to see you both. Together, again. Tucker, Emerson acknowledged with a nod. You know, I was just telling the widow Hollister the other day I had a feeling about you two right from the start, Tucker continued, clearly enjoying himself. Found her in a blizzard, did you, like something out of a dime novel? It's the truth, Mr. Tucker, Lillian said firmly. Oh, I believe it, Tucker assured her. Just saying it's a fine story, one to tell the grandchildren someday. Emerson's hand came to rest lightly at the small of Lillian's back, a gesture of support that sent warmth spreading through her. If you'll excuse us, Wade, I promised Miss Vaughn some punch. As they made their way across the room, Lillian spotted Jeremiah near the food table, a glass of something that was certainly not punch in his hand. He saw her too, his face darkening, but made no move to approach. The woman beside him, Willa Harper, Lillian presumed followed his gaze and whispered something in his ear that made him laugh derisively. Ignore them, Emerson said softly, noticing the direction of her attention. I am, Lillian replied, and was surprised to find it was mostly true. Jeremiah's power to hurt her had diminished significantly in the weeks since she'd left his house. They danced that night, Emerson leading her somewhat stiffly but competently through a Virginia reel and several waltzes. His hand was warm in hers, his body a solid presence as they moved together, and Lillian found herself wishing the evening would never end. But end it did, with Emerson escorting her back to Martha's house under a sky full of stars. They paused at the front gate, reluctant to part. I had a wonderful time, Lillian said, looking up at him in the moonlight. So did I, he replied. He hesitated, then asked, Would you like to visit the ranch tomorrow? I could pick you up after church, if Mrs. Hollister doesn't object. I'm sure she won't, Lillian said, trying to contain her delight at the prospect of seeing where he lived again, this time not as a half-frozen refugee, but as a guest perhaps, even as something more. Their courtship progressed steadily through the late winter and into spring. Every week, Emerson would come to town to see Lillian, taking her for walks to church socials, or simply sitting with her in Martha's parlor, talking about everything and nothing. On Sundays, she would often accompany him back to his ranch for the afternoon, helping with small chores and learning about the rhythms of ranch life. It was on one such Sunday in April, with the snow melted and the first green shoots appearing in the pastures, that Emerson finally kissed her. They had been walking along the creek that ran through his property, admiring the way the sun glinted off the rushing water when he stopped suddenly and turned to her. Lillian, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need to tell you something. Her heart quickened. Yes. I'm not good with words, never have been, but I want you to know. He took a deep breath. These past months, knowing you, being with you, they've been the happiest of my life. She moved closer to him, emboldened by the emotion in his eyes. Mine too, Emerson. I never thought I'd find someone, he continued. After the war I was broken, I suppose, didn't think I had anything to offer a woman, but then you came along. You found me in the snow, she reminded him softly. No, he said, shaking his head. You found me, I was just existing before. Going through the motions. Now I'm living again. He reached out, his calloused hand gentle as it cupped her cheek. May I kiss you, Lillian? In answer, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as his arms came around her, drawing her close. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I love you, Emerson whispered against her hair. I think I have since that first night, watching you sleep by my fire, so brave despite everything you'd been through. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. I love you too. I was so afraid to admit it, even to myself. After Jeremiah, I was wary of depending on anyone again, but you're nothing like him. You're good, Emerson, the best man I've ever known. They stood there by the creek, holding each other as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the awakening land. In town, their courtship became the subject of much gossip, though most of it was good-natured. The story of how they met had taken on almost mythic proportions, with some versions claiming Emerson had fought off wolves to rescue Lillian, or that she had been buried completely in snow with only a hand visible to alert him to her presence. Martha Hollister watched their growing attachment with approval, though she took Lillian aside one evening for a frank discussion. I'm happy for you, child, she said, her work-worn hands busy with knitting. But I want to be sure you're thinking clearly. Marriage is a serious step, especially to a rancher. It's a hard life, isolated with much work and little comfort. I know, Lillian replied, but I love him, Martha, and I'm not afraid of hard work. The older woman nodded. I believe you, and he's a good man, your Emerson. I've made some inquiries discreetly, of course. Everyone speaks well of him. Honest, hardworking, keeps to himself, but always ready to help a neighbor in need. That sounds like him, Lillian agreed with a smile. Just one more thing, Martha said, her expression turning serious. There are rumors about his past. Nothing scandalous, mind you, but people say he came west to escape something. A tragedy of some sort, Lillian frowned. He fought in the war. Many men carry burdens from that time. Perhaps that's all it is, Martha conceded. But if you're to build a life with him, there shouldn't be secrets between you. The conversation stayed with Lillian, and the next time she and Emerson were alone, sitting on the porch of his cabin as evening descended, she gathered her courage to ask. Emerson, she began carefully, will you tell me about your life before you came west? You know everything about me, but you speak so little of your past. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Just when Lillian thought he might not answer, he spoke. I grew up in Pennsylvania, farm country, had a normal childhood, I suppose. Parents were good people, hardworking. I had a younger sister, Emma. His voice caught slightly on the name. When the war came, I enlisted. Wasn't much older than a boy, really, but I felt it was my duty. He fell silent again, and Lillian waited patiently, sensing there was more he needed to say. When I came home in '65, everything was different. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. Couldn't settle back into farm life. Kept having nightmares, seeing the faces of men I'd killed. My parents didn't understand. How could they? He sighed deeply. Then I met Sarah. She was the daughter of our nearest neighbors. We'd grown up together, but somehow when I returned, she wasn't just the girl next door anymore. Lillian felt a twinge of something, not quite jealousy, but a sharp awareness that there had been someone else in his heart before her. We got engaged, Emerson continued. Planned to marry that fall, but then. He swallowed hard. There was a fire, our farmhouse. My parents and Emma were inside. So was Sarah, who had come for dinner that evening. I was in the barn checking on a sick horse. Horror washed over Lillian as she began to understand. "Oh, Emerson, I couldn't save them," he said, his voice hollow with old grief. "I tried. God knows I tried. But the fire was too hot, too fast. By the time help arrived, it was too late." Tears streamed down Lillian's face now. "I'm so sorry. Afterward, I couldn't stay there. Everywhere I looked, I saw them, heard them. So I sold what was left of the farm and came west. Thought maybe if I put enough distance between myself and Pennsylvania, I could outrun the memories." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the pain of his past. "I never thought I'd love again, Lillian. Never wanted to. The risk of loss was too great." She reached for his hand, holding it tightly in both of hers. "But you did love again." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, despite my best efforts not to. Thank you for telling me," she said softly, "for trusting me with your past." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "There's nothing in my life I wouldn't share with you, Lillian. Nothing." 2 weeks later, on a perfect May morning with wildflowers dotting the meadows and the mountains standing crisp and clear against a blue sky, Emerson asked Lillian to be his wife. They were planting a vegetable garden beside his cabin, a project Lillian had suggested as a way to supplement their meals with fresh produce. As she knelt in the newly turned earth, setting out seedlings that Martha had helped her start, Emerson suddenly stopped his digging and came to kneel beside her. "Lillian," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes, "I had a whole speech planned, but seeing you here, making my house into a home, I can't wait another moment." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple but beautiful gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing that survived the fire, because she'd left it on the windowsill while washing dishes that day." He took a deep breath. "Lillian Vaughn, I love you with everything I am. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Joy burst within her like sunshine through clouds. "Yes," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "Yes, Flint Emerson, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her, then pulled her into his arms, heedless of the garden dirt smudging both their clothes. Their wedding was held in the small church in Rico on the first Saturday in June. The entire town seemed to attend, partly out of genuine goodwill and partly, Lillian suspected, because their story had captured the local imagination. Martha stood in place of Lillian's mother, helping her prepare and lending her a beautiful lace veil that had been her own decades earlier. Even Wade Tucker proved himself useful, organizing a collection among the townspeople to present the couple with a matched pair of rocking chairs for their porch. Only Jeremiah was notably absent, having left town the month before for a mining opportunity further west. Lillian found she could not regret his absence. The day was too perfect to be marred by old grievances. As she walked down the aisle toward Emerson, who waited for her looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed in a new suit, Lillian reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. Had her stepfather not cast her out that snowy night, had Emerson not happened to be riding home at exactly the right time, had she perished in the blizzard, as so easily could have happened, none of this would be possible. Perhaps, she thought as she reached Emerson and placed her hand in his, some good could come even from the darkest moments. Perhaps sometimes we must be lost before we can be found. The ceremony was simple but moving, with Emerson's voice clear and sure as he spoke his vows, and Lillian's soft but equally certain as she pledged herself to him in return. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation seemed to shake the very rafters of the small church. The celebration afterward was held in the church hall, with food contributed by every household in Rico and music, provided by the same fiddle players who had played at the social, where Emerson and Lillian had first danced together. This time, though, as they took to the floor for their first dance as husband and wife, Emerson moved with confidence, holding Lillian close as they swayed together. "Happy Mrs. Emerson," he murmured in her ear. The name sent a thrill through her. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. Later, as they prepared to leave amid a shower of rice and well wishes, Martha pulled Lillian aside for one final embrace. "I'll miss you, child," the older woman said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "You've become like a daughter to me these past months." "I'll visit often," Lillian promised, "and you must come to the ranch whenever you wish. There will always be a place for you there." Martha nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Go on now. Your husband is waiting." Husband. The word still seemed miraculous to Lillian as she joined Emerson by the wagon that would take them to their home. He helped her up to the seat, his touch lingering on her waist, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they drove away from town, the setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and rose, as if nature itself were celebrating their union. Lillian leaned against Emerson's shoulder, content in a way she had never known before. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his arm coming around her. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," she replied. "With you," he smiled down at her, love plain in his eyes. "Welcome home, Lillian." And as they approached the cabin nestled against the backdrop of mountains, the same cabin that had once been her shelter from the storm Lillian knew, that home was no longer a place but a person. Home was Emerson, and she was his, and together they would build a life as enduring as the mountains themselves. Their first year of marriage passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Lillian quickly adapted to life as a rancher's wife, learning to manage the household, tend to the garden, help with the livestock, and still have dinner ready when Emerson came in from the fields. It was not an easy life, but it was a fulfilling one, made rich by their deepening love for each other. The small cabin gradually transformed under Lillian's care. Curtains appeared at the windows, braided rugs covered the rough floors, and a collection of books began to fill the shelves Emerson built for her. In the fall, they added a room to the cabin, working side by side to construct what would eventually be a nursery, though neither spoke this hope aloud yet. Their first Christmas together was particularly special. A light snow fell as they decorated their home with pine boughs and berries Lillian had gathered, and a small tree cut from their own land stood in one corner, adorned with paper ornaments and candles. They exchanged modest gifts, a new hat Lillian had saved for months to purchase for Emerson, and a beautiful wool shawl he had ordered from a catalog for her. But the best gift came in the new year, when Lillian realized she was expecting their first child. "Are you certain?" Emerson asked, his face a study in hope and wonder when she told him one evening as they sat before the fire. "As certain as I can be," she replied, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "The baby should come in late summer, according to Martha's calculations." Joy transformed his features, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Lillian remaining active and healthy despite the occasional bout of morning sickness. Martha visited frequently, bringing advice and small gifts for the coming child. And even Wade, Tucker, took it upon himself to send baby items from his store at a special discount for the town's favorite couple, as he put it. As Lillian's body changed, growing round with their child, Emerson's protectiveness increased tenfold. He insisted on hiring a young man from town to help with the heavier ranch work, so Lillian wouldn't overexert herself, and he spent evenings reading aloud from her favorite books as she sewed tiny garments for the baby. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the swell of her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "I hope so," he said, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. "I didn't have much time with my own father as a model." "You have everything you need right here," Lillian said, placing her hand over his heart. "Love, patience, strength. Our child will be blessed to have you." The baby came in August, on a sweltering day when the cicadas buzzed incessantly and the mountains shimmered in the heat. Lillian's labor began at dawn, and by midday, Martha had been summoned from town to assist. Emerson paced outside the bedroom door, his face ashen with worry as Lillian's cries reached him. "Is this normal?" he demanded when Martha emerged briefly for fresh water. "She sounds like she's dying." The older woman gave him a sympathetic but firm look. "Childbirth is never easy, Flint, but Lillian is strong. Have faith." Hours passed, the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks, when a new cry filled the cabin, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "Emerson," Martha called. "Come meet your son." He entered the bedroom with trepidation, then stopped short at the sight before him. Lillian, exhausted but radiant, cradled a small bundle in her arms. When she looked up and saw him, her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Come see him," she said softly. "He's perfect." Emerson approached the bed as if in a dream, sinking down beside his wife and newborn son. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he cried. "Would you like to hold him?" Lillian asked. Emerson hesitated, his large hands suddenly seeming too rough, too clumsy for such a delicate task. But Lillian was already placing the baby in his arms, showing him how to support the tiny head. "We thought to name him Jacob, after Martha's husband," Lillian said, watching father and son together. "But it's your decision, too." Emerson looked down at the now quieting infant, who seemed to be studying him with unfocused eyes. "Jacob," he repeated softly. "Jacob Emerson. It's a good name." Later, after Martha had gone to rest in the newly completed guest room and Lillian had nursed Jacob for the first time, Emerson sat beside the bed, unwilling to leave his family even for a moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For our son. For making me a father when I never thought I'd have a family again." Lillian reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "We're just beginning, my love, just beginning." As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered as well. Emerson's careful management and Lillian's thrifty housekeeping allowed them to expand their herd and improve their land. They added more rooms to the cabin, transforming it gradually into a proper house, with a kitchen big enough for Lillian to preserve the bounty from her now extensive garden, and a parlor where they could entertain the occasional visitors from town. Life was not without its challenges. A particularly harsh winter when Jacob was too tested their resources and resilience. A bout of fever the following spring sent Lillian to bed for nearly 2 weeks, leaving Emerson to manage both ranch and household with help from Martha, who came to stay until the crisis passed. And always there was the isolation of ranch life, the distance from neighbors and town that sometimes weighed heavily on Lillian, especially during Emerson's infrequent but necessary trips to Denver on ranch business. But the difficulties only seemed to strengthen their bond, drawing them closer as they faced each obstacle together. And the joy of watching their son grow, of building their life day by day, far outweighed any hardships. On their 5th wedding anniversary, with Jacob asleep in his room and the June night warm and star-filled around them, Emerson and Lillian sat on their porch in the rocking chairs that had been their wedding gift from the town. Lillian's hand rested on her stomach, where a slight roundness was just beginning to show their second child, due in the winter. "You ever regret it?" Emerson asked suddenly. "Marrying me, living out here so far from town and people?" Lillian turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Never. Not for a single moment. Even when the snow's piled to the windowsills and the wind howls for days on end," she smiled, understanding now. "Even then. Especially then, because it reminds me of the night we met." He reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me." "To us," Lillian corrected gently. "It brought us together when we needed each other most." As they rocked in companionable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains that had become home, Lillian reflected on the journey that had led her here. From a frightened young woman cast out into the snow to a wife, mother, and partner, in building something lasting and meaningful, it was a transformation as profound as the changing seasons, as enduring as the love that had made it possible. And in the quiet of the night, with Emerson's hand warm in hers and their children, one sleeping peacefully, one not yet born but already beloved, safe under their roof, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that some storms bring not destruction, but the promise of new beginnings. That sometimes, it is only when we are most lost that we find our way home at last.